But like, I don't want to say this. I don't want to say this, but like, this team, like, this team functions better. And I need to be very careful how I say something, because the Indiana...
What if the best thing that ever happened to a franchise was also the thing preventing them from reaching their ultimate goal? What if the player who sells out every arena, dominates every highlight reel, and carries every conversation about women's basketball was simultaneously the missing piece and the mismatched piece of a championship puzzle? That's the...
Fight harder? They play harder. And Caitlin only played 15 minutes last night. I agree. It's nothing to do with Caitlin Clark. If Caitlin Clark's sitting on the bench and Caitlin Clark's there, it is literally when Caitlin is not there. It's like they have it in their head that we need to show we can win without her. And they play with more effort. They play with, I'm not even gonna say they play with more structure. They play harder. They fight more. Like, if they're down 10 points with Caitlin, it's like, oh, fuck it.
The question nobody in Indiana wants to ask out loud. That's the conversation that makes front offices sweat and fan bases erupt. That's the uncomfortable reality sitting in the middle of every Fever film session, every practice, every timeout when Caitlin Clark walks off the floor and her teammates suddenly look like a completely different team. Not a worse team, not a lesser team. A different team. A dangerous team. A team that fights harder, moves better, believes more deeply in what they're doing, and wins games with a grit and urgency that seems to evaporate the moment their generational superstar checks back in. This isn't about talent, this isn't about effort, this isn't a conspiracy. This is something far more complicated, far more fascinating, and far more consequential for the future of the WNBA's most watched franchise. This is about identity, and Indiana has
if you have the ball and you're not wide open to shoot, your job is to pass the ball to Aliyah Boston or Kelsey Mitchell, and then let them do it. Ideally, you pass the ball to Kelsey. There's more ball movement because it's just, you move the ball constantly until Kelsey's open and Kelsey does what she does. But like, or Aliyah does what she does. But man, Ty Harris.
Two of them, there are moments in sports broadcasting where you can actually watch someone wrestling with what they're about to say in real time. You can see the internal calculation happening, the weighing of consequences, the awareness that certain words once spoken cannot be taken back. This was one of those moments. I don't want to say this, but this team functions better. Watch that hesitation. Sit with that pause, because what you're witnessing isn't someone searching for the right words. It's someone who has already found the right words and is genuinely conflicted about releasing them into the world. This isn't a hot take being manufactured for clicks and engagement. This is an honest basketball observer grappling with something they've watched with their own eyes and cannot logically explain away. The Indiana Fever are better when Caitlin Clark isn't playing.
On the same page. And it's not a conspiracy thing. It is the fact that it feels like the team has bought into a style of play that doesn't suit Caitlin Clark. It feels like Ty Harris going on a late game tear by herself. She had 7 points at the end of the game in a row by herself. It feels like they've bought into that underdog mentality of like, if you guys haven't been watching, it's like,
not better as in more talented, not better as in more likely to win a championship, but better as in more cohesive, more intense, more locked in, more themselves. Better as in the basketball they play without her looks like a team that has figured something out, found a rhythm, bought into a collective identity that produces winning basketball. And the numbers in their most recent performance didn't lie. Caitlin Clark played just 15 minutes, and in those remaining minutes without her, the Fever looked like legitimate contenders.
Health play that they played tonight that nearly got them to the finals last year. And there's a style of play, and you can't just sub Caitlin Clark into that. Like, you can't play like they did tonight with Caitlin Clark on your team. What would the ramifications to the Fever and WNBA be if Caitlin Clark's made a 12, 16-minute bench player? And the ramifications for the Indiana Fever would be pretty much that they have an asset that you could is that at the end of the season, because Caitlyn's due an epic extension, you would have to salary dump Caitlyn. Like, the ramifications for you benching Caitlyn means you would have to salary dump Caitlyn. And they can't win a chip without Caitlyn. I agree. I also don't think they can win a chip with Caitlyn right now.
Kelsey Mitchell erupted for 29 points, 8 assists, 3 steals, and 0 turnovers. 0. In a basketball game where turnovers are as inevitable as breathing, Kelsey Mitchell handled the ball that much and didn't give it away once. Aliyah Boston was physical, present, and dominant in her role. The ball moved with a crispness and purpose that made the whole offense look effortless. The defense had an edge, a nastiness that forced opponents into mistakes. They came back from a double-digit deficit and won convincingly. So the question that nobody wants to ask, because asking it feels disloyal to the sport's biggest star, because asking it feels like attacking someone who has done nothing wrong, because asking it opens a door that might lead somewhere deeply uncomfortable, is this: what does it mean when your best player makes you worse? Not worse through bad play, not worse through poor effort, but worse through something far more structural, far more philosophical, far more difficult to fix than simply telling someone to try harder or shoot less or pass more.
And, like, I don't think they can win a chip with Caitlyn. And this was like borderline miracle comeback today. It really was. And I'm gonna be honest, like, this was an incredible performance from Ty Harris. Absolutely an incredible performance from Ty Harris. And like, it's hard to justify benching Ty Harris on Sunday. It just is.
What does it mean when the identity that makes a team great is fundamentally incompatible with the presence of their superstar? That's what's happening in Indiana, and everyone can see it. The players can feel it. The coaching staff knows it. The analysts are starting to say it out loud despite their hesitation. And Caitlin Clark, who is one of the most basketball-intelligent people in the sport, certainly understands it too. The question is what anyone is going to do about it. To understand the problem, you have to understand the solution. Because the Fever without Caitlin Clark aren't playing some chaotic, inspired but unsustainable basketball. They're executing a very specific, very coherent system that Stephanie White has installed with deliberate intention. The offensive philosophy when Caitlin sits is almost brutally simple on the surface. Move the ball constantly. Keep it moving until Kelsey Mitchell or Aliyah Boston gets a clean look, then get out of the way and let them work. That's it, no elaborate...
Caitlin just doesn't play the system. Caitlin doesn't play the system. Like, it is what it is. It is what it is. And I hate saying it. Like, they look like a better unit when Caitlin's not there. And that's okay. Because
motion sets, no complex read progressions, no ISO plays designed to create mismatches through individual brilliance, just relentless ball movement, collective trust, and the belief that if you keep the offense flowing, eventually one of your two best scorers will find themselves with an opportunity to do what they do best. And here's the thing that makes this observation so uncomfortable for Fever fans: it works. It works reliably. It works against good teams. It works in pressure situations. It works when the game is on the line and every possession matters. The Fever under this system are undefeated in games where Tiara Harris starts. They've beaten the Chicago Sky. They've handled the Los Angeles Sparks. They've taken down the Las Vegas Aces, albeit without a Ja Wilson. They've defeated the Phoenix Mercury. These aren't world-beating opponents, but wins are wins, and the consistency with which they're producing those wins while playing this way tells you something important.
The way Caitlin Clark wants to play. It just does. This is the wrong roster. You can't say they got swept playing Caitlin ball because they didn't play Caitlin ball in the playoffs. They didn't. Christy Sides got spooked and said, this won't work in the playoffs, and played and went back to what had them a bad start. Like, they did not attempt to play Caitlin ball in the playoffs 2024. We don't know. We don't know what a team built around Caitlin Clark can do. And I personally think if you put the right pieces around Caitlin Clark and you play to her style, you can win a title. I don't think Stephanie White can win a title the way she's playing. I don't. But I think Stephanie White can make you perpetually
about the validity of the system. This isn't a fluke, this is a team that has found something real. But what they've found is only accessible when a specific player isn't on the floor, and that's where everything gets complicated. Because the system that Stephanie White is running isn't designed around Caitlin Clark's strengths. It's designed around defensive intensity, role clarity, collective sacrifice, and an underdog mentality that drove this core group to near finals basketball in 2024. This is the system they know. This is the system they trust. This is the system they've built muscle memory and mental confidence around through hundreds of practices and dozens of games. And Caitlin Clark plays a fundamentally different style of basketball. Here's the concept that cuts to the heart of everything: the underdog mentality. It sounds like a cliche. Every team talks about having a chip on their shoulder, about being disrespected, about proving doubters wrong.
When you're the Indiana Fever and you didn't make a playoffs for nearly a decade, cementing yourself as a solid playoff team is important. The problem is that you can't just put Caitlin Clark into this system. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. It's like if you, again, if the 04 Pistons, let's just say hypothetically, Allen Iverson was on the 03 Pistons, and then it's not Allen Iverson, Steve Nash. He was All-NBA. He was an All-NBA first-team player. And then Steve Nash.
It's the kind of language that gets used in every locker room speech in every sport at every level. But what's happening with the Indiana Fever without Caitlin Clark is something more genuine, more deeply felt, more practically impactful than sports cliché. This core group of Fever players built their identity around being overlooked. They went through years of losing basketball. They went through roster rebuilds and coaching changes in seasons where the playoffs felt like a distant fantasy. When they finally started winning, when they started competing, it wasn't because they suddenly had a superstar who elevated everyone around her. It was because they found each other, found a system, found a collective belief that together they were more than the sum of their individual parts. That's a powerful thing in sports. That togetherness, that us against the world psychology, is genuinely difficult to manufacture. You can't coach it directly. You can't acquire it in free agency. It grows organically from shared struggle and shared triumph, and once a team has it,
it is a shit one. It is genuinely a shit one. Do I wish that it's all worked out? Yeah. Of course I do. Of course I do. Like, I'm not out here calling, and I'm not out here calling conspiracy. There are times in basketball where it just doesn't work out. And that is fine. That is absolutely fine. But yeah, look. It is what it is. Good win for Indiana.
Becomes one of their most valuable competitive assets. The Fever had that. They nearly rode it to the finals in 2024. But here's the brutal reality that nobody in Indiana wants to acknowledge. You cannot maintain an underdog mentality when you have Caitlin Clark on your roster. Think about what Caitlin Clark's presence means from a structural, contextual standpoint. She's the most famous player in women's basketball history. She sold out arenas during her college career. She elevated WNBA viewership numbers by margins that had never been seen before. She generates more media coverage, more sponsorship interest, more casual fan attention than anyone else in the league combined. Every team she plays against game plans specifically to stop her. Every opponent knows that neutralizing Caitlin Clark gives them their best chance to win. When Caitlin Clark is on your team, you are not the underdog. You are not overlooked. You are not the scrappy group of grinders that the
Are you going to bring Caitlin off the bench? And the question is, like, I think it's hard to justify benching Ty Harris for Sunday. It is. It just is. Like, it is really hard to justify benching Ty Harris. But anyway, yeah. That is pretty much it, lads. I'll see you guys.
Basketball world is sleeping on. You are a franchise with expectations, with obligations. with pressure to perform at the highest level because you have a generational talent and the world is watching. That's not a criticism of Caitlyn, that's not her fault. That's simply what happens when you have a once-in-a-generation player on your roster. The narrative changes, the expectations change, the psychological environment changes, and for a team whose greatest strength is their underdog psychology, that change is genuinely destabilizing. So when Caitlyn sits down and the other Fever players take the floor, something happens in their heads. The weight of expectation lifts slightly. The narrative simplifies. They're no longer Caitlyn Clark's supporting cast trying to justify their superstar's presence. They're a group of professional basketball players trying to prove that they belong, trying to show that they can compete without their most famous teammate, trying to recapture the identity that nearly took them to the finals. And they fight harder, they communicate better, they take every possession seriously because they know there's no safety net. They play with urgency and intensity because the moment doesn't feel too big anymore. It feels like exactly the kind of moment they've been preparing for their entire careers. That's not a sustainable team-building strategy. You cannot win a championship by being better when your best player sits, but it reveals something deeply important about who this team actually is versus who the league assumes they are. If you want to understand what's happening in Indiana, think about the 2004 Detroit Pistons.
From watching basketball and from a basketball perspective. From a basketball perspective, it would be incredibly mutually beneficial to trade Caitlyn Clark. And that's not we're not going into sabotage, we're not doing this. Stephanie White clearly has a vision for a team. And to say Stephanie White's this terrible coach, it's clearly working. Her vision clearly is working. And that's not saying that Caitlyn Clark.
That team won the NBA championship without a single player in the top 5 of MVP voting. They beat the Los Angeles Lakers, a team with Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe Bryant in their prime, in 5 games. They did it through defense, discipline, chemistry, and a collective commitment to an identity that was bigger than any individual ego. The 2004 Pistons knew exactly who they were. They were a defensive team, a team basketball team, a team where everyone knew their role, everyone trusted the system, and everyone subordinated individual glory for collective success. Chauncey Billups ran the offense with control and efficiency. Richard Hamilton made cuts and ran off screens with relentless discipline. Ben Wallace intimidated and protected the rim without needing the ball. Tayshaun Prince defended every assignment with intelligence and effort. Rasheed Wallace was the wild card who somehow fit perfectly into the structure. It was a beautiful system, a championship system, but it was also a system that required everyone to buy completely into their defined role. Now ask yourself, what would have happened if you had inserted Allen Iverson into that team? Iverson in 2003-04 was an All-NBA first-team player. He was an MVP-caliber talent. He was one of the most individually brilliant players in basketball, but his game was built on volume scoring, isolation basketball, creating off the dribble, and having the ball in his hands to maximize his impact. His style was the philosophical opposite of everything the Pistons were doing. He wouldn't have been a bad player in Detroit. He would have been himself, which means he would have been great in the ways he was always great. But his presence would have fundamentally disrupted the chemistry, the role clarity, and the collective identity that made the Pistons champions. And the Pistons, trying to accommodate his brilliance, would have become something undefined, something that was neither the team basketball machine that won the ring nor a true Iverson-centric team built to maximize his skills. They would have been caught in between, and teams caught in between don't win championships. That's Indiana right now. The Fever have an identity. It's a championship-caliber identity when everyone buys in, but it's an identity that exists fully only when Caitlyn Clark isn't on the floor, and when she comes back they become something undefined. They're not fully committed to her style. They're not fully committed to Stephanie White's system. They're trying to be both simultaneously, which means they're truly neither. And teams that are neither don't win championships either. To properly understand the 2025 crisis, you have to go back to the 2024 season and examine what Christie's sides did in the playoffs. Because we've never actually seen what a team fully built around Caitlyn Clark can do in a high-stakes situation. And that matters enormously for this conversation. During the 2024 regular season, the Fever played a specific brand of basketball when they committed to Caitlyn. They played up-tempo, they pushed in transition, they spread the floor and let Caitlyn's passing vision create advantages. They ran plays designed to get her open looks from 3, and when defenses collapsed to prevent that, she found cutters and open teammates for easy baskets. It was genuinely fun basketball. It was genuinely effective basketball. And it showed real glimpses of what Caitlyn-centric offense could look like at its best. Then the playoffs came, and Christie's sides got scared. Whether it was the pressure of the moment, concerns about matchup-specific problems, or simply a coaching philosophy that defaulted to conservatism when the stakes were highest, sides abandoned the up-tempo, Caitlyn-driven approach that had produced results. She went back to the slower, more structured, more defensively oriented style that the core group had operated in before Caitlyn's arrival, and the Fever got swept. Here's the critical point: we never saw what Caitlyn Ball could do in the playoffs. We never got the data. We never ran the experiment. We never found out if the offense that worked in the regular season could hold up against playoff-level defensive intensity and opponent-specific preparation. Instead, we found out that the Fever's old identity, without full commitment to their new superstar, couldn't compete against elite playoff opposition. And now, in 2025, with Stephanie White installing a system that seems to work even better without Caitlyn than Christie Sides' system did, we're heading toward the same cliff from a different direction. Stephanie White is a better coach than Christie Sides. The evidence suggests that clearly. Her system is more coherent, more consistently applied, and producing better results even early in the season. But her system isn't designed to maximize Caitlyn Clark. It's designed for the players who fit her preferred style. And Caitlyn, through no fault of her own, doesn't naturally fit that style. So we're in the same situation with different details. Caitlyn Clark is on the Indiana Fever. The Indiana Fever have not figured out how to build a system that maximizes Caitlyn Clark. And time is passing. This is where the conversation requires some nuance and some fairness to everyone involved. Stephanie White is not a bad coach. Based on everything we've seen, she might actually be a very good coach. Her vision for how basketball should be played is coherent, well-executed, and producing wins. Her players are engaged, committed, and performing at high levels within her system. She is doing her job. The case for Stephanie White is actually quite compelling if you examine it honestly. She takes a roster of defenders and grinders and turns them into something greater than their individual parts. She creates cultures of accountability, of effort, of collective sacrifice. She's not going to outdraw and outshoot opponents into submission. She's going to out-tough them, out-compete them, out-execute them in the half-court, and force them into mistakes that her disciplined defense can capitalize on. That's a legitimate path to success in basketball. It's not the flashiest path. It's not the path that generates the most exciting highlight reels, but it's a path that consistently produces winning basketball and occasionally produces championship basketball when the right team fully commits to it. The problem is that Caitlyn Clark's basketball strengths don't align with that path. Caitlyn thrives in transition. She reads the floor at a speed and with an anticipation that creates easy baskets before defenses can set up. She makes passes that other guards don't even see as options, threading balls into spaces that open up because of how her presence commands defensive attention. She shoots from distances and off movements that force defenses to guard her 30 feet from the basket, creating driving lanes and kick-out opportunities for teammates. That's not half-court basketball. That's not grind-it-out basketball. That's pace-in-space basketball, playmaking basketball, basketball that requires a specific roster construction and a specific coaching philosophy to maximize. Neither style is wrong. Both styles can win at the highest level, but they're not the same style. And you cannot successfully combine them by simply putting a player in and taking her out and hoping the team adjusts on the fly. What happens when you try to force the combination is exactly what the Fever are experiencing now. The team has developed such a clear and committed identity without Caitlyn that her presence disrupts the flow rather than enhancing it. Players who know exactly what to do in Stephanie White's system suddenly have to recalibrate when Caitlyn checks in. The ball movement patterns change. The decision hierarchy changes. The defensive assignments and rotations might subtly shift. And all of that recalibration costs something, costs the edge and the clarity and the collective confidence that makes the team dangerous when they're all on the same page. And then there's Tierra Harris. This is where the situation goes from complicated to genuinely agonizing for the Indiana Fever's decision makers. Tierra Harris had one of those performances in the most recent Fever game that changes conversations. 7 straight points in crunch time, decisive, confident, winning plays when the moment demanded them. The kind of performance that makes coaches, teammates, and fans stand up and say, "This player belongs. This player deserves to be on the floor in important moments." The team is undefeated when she starts, undefeated, perfect record with her in the starting lineup. So what does Stephanie White do on Sunday? Does she bench the player who just won her a game? Does she remove from the starting lineup someone who has proven herself in exactly the high-pressure situations coaches care most about? Does she tell Tierra Harris that her production, her performance, her contribution to wins doesn't matter because a more famous player needs her minutes? From a basketball standpoint, that's nearly impossible to justify. From a culture standpoint, it sends a terrible message to every player in the locker room about what actually earns playing time and recognition on this team. From a winning standpoint, why would you change something that's clearly working? But from a franchise standpoint, from a Caitlin Clark standpoint, from a long-term competitive standpoint, how do you justify limiting your best player to 15 minutes while someone else starts? This is the impossible position the Fever have built themselves into. Not through malice, not through incompetence, not through anyone making obviously bad decisions, but through the gradual accumulation of choices that made sense individually but have produced a collective situation that has no clean resolution. You can justify Tierra Harris starting, you can justify Caitlin Clark starting. You cannot justify both simultaneously if we're being honest about what the game tape tells us about how they fit together in this specific system. And no matter which choice Stephanie White makes, someone is going to be right to question it. Can the Indiana Fever win a championship with Caitlin Clark? Not can Caitlin Clark be part of a championship team, not can a team built around Caitlin Clark's strengths win a title, but can this specific Indiana Fever team with this specific roster, this specific coaching philosophy, and this specific system win a championship with Caitlin Clark integrated into what they're doing? The honest answer, based on everything we've observed, is probably no. Not because of Caitlin's limitations, not because of any individual failure, but because of the fundamental misalignment between what maximizes her brilliance and what maximizes this team's collective potential. This roster was built for a specific style of play. The players are excellent within that style. Kelsey Mitchell as a secondary ball handler in a movement-based offense is devastating. Aliyah Boston as the interior presence in a half-court system that values positional basketball is dominant. The role players understand their assignments, fill their spots, and execute within defined parameters. When everyone does their job in Stephanie White's system, this team is very good. But integrating Caitlin Clark into that system requires those same players to change how they operate. It requires Kelsey Mitchell to be a secondary option rather than the focal point. It requires the offense to change its decision-making hierarchy. It requires everyone to make slightly different choices in slightly different situations, and that recalibration has a cost. Meanwhile, if you build the team around Caitlin, if you construct the roster to maximize her playmaking, if you install a system that uses her strengths as the foundation, you likely need different role players. Players who excel in transition rather than half-court execution. Players who are better off-ball shooters to create the spacing Caitlin needs. Players whose defensive capabilities allow you to play at a faster pace without giving up easy baskets in transition. That's a different team than the Fever currently have. And here's the most uncomfortable truth of all. Assembling that team would likely require moving on from some players who are genuinely good, who have earned their spots, who deserve to be on a professional basketball team. Not because they're not talented enough, but because their skills optimize for a different style than what Caitlin needs. Those are hard choices. Those are choices that hurt good people who have done nothing wrong. And they're choices that Indiana has not been willing to make, which is why they're caught between two identities instead of committed to one. Here is where the analysis arrives at its most explosive and most misunderstood point. From a pure basketball perspective, from a what gives all parties the best chance to win a championship perspective, trading Caitlin Clark might be mutually beneficial. Read that carefully. Mutually beneficial, not punitive, not a punishment for failure, not an acknowledgement that she's not good enough. Mutually beneficial as in, perhaps the best thing for Caitlin Clark's championship aspirations and the best thing for Indiana's championship aspirations might be finding her a home where the system, the roster, and the coaching philosophy align with how she plays basketball. Think about it from Indiana's perspective. If you commit to Stephanie White's system, if you lean fully into the defensive-minded, ball movement-oriented, underdog mentality brand of basketball that is currently producing wins, you have a team that can make the playoffs consistently. You can compete deep into the postseason in years when things break right. You might even fluke your way to a finals appearance under the right circumstances. That's real, meaningful success. But if you're paying Caitlin Clark supermax money and she's playing 15 minutes in a system that doesn't utilize her gifts, you're wasting everyone's time and resources. You can't pay someone maximum dollars and give them minimum opportunity. That's not sustainable financially, culturally, or competitively. Now think about it from Caitlin's perspective. She deserves to be on a team that is built around her. She deserves a coach who believes in her style, a roster that complements her strengths, an organizational philosophy that says, Caitlin Clark is our foundation, everything we do builds on her. That team could be genuinely terrifying. That team could contend for championships in ways that the current Fever configuration cannot. We've never seen what that team looks like because Indiana has never fully committed to building it. Christie Sides got scared in the playoffs and retreated. Stephanie White came in with her own vision that doesn't center Caitlin's game. And Caitlin has been a professional about it, competing hard in whatever role she's given, but the results speak for themselves. The WNBA team that goes all in on building around Caitlin Clark, that surrounds her with the right pieces, installs the right system, and trusts her brilliance in high-pressure moments, that team could be something special. That team could change the conversation about what women's basketball can look like at its highest level. And that team might not be in Indiana. The contract extension question makes everything more urgent. Caitlin Clark is due for a supermax extension soon. That decision is coming whether Indiana is ready for it or not. And the choice the Fever make around that extension will define the franchise for the next decade. If they give her the supermax, they're making a statement. We are building around Caitlin Clark. We are going to figure out how to make this work. We are committed to her as our franchise cornerstone, and that commitment requires actual follow-through. It requires roster changes. It requires philosophical commitment from the coaching staff. It requires everyone in the organization to be genuinely aligned on what they're building. Half measures don't work at supermax money. You can't pay someone franchise player money and then continue to run a system that's clearly better without them. If they don't give her the supermax, if they let her walk or facilitate a trade, they're making a different statement. This system, this team, this identity is more important to us than accommodating a generational talent. That's a legitimate organizational choice. It's the kind of choice that won championships in Detroit in 2004. But it has to be made honestly and directly, not through passive decisions and organizational drift. What Indiana cannot continue to do is maintain the ambiguity. They cannot continue pretending that everything is fine, that the fit is being figured out, that the system will adapt and Caitlin will adapt, and somehow everything will align into a championship formula. The game tape doesn't support that optimism, the results don't support that optimism, and most importantly, the clock is ticking on everyone involved. For the WNBA as a broader institution, this situation carries enormous stakes. Caitlin Clark's impact on the league's growth has been undeniable. Attendance numbers, viewership figures, sponsorship interest, social media engagement, all of it has gone up significantly with her presence. Her success is good for the league in ways that extend far beyond Indiana's win-loss record. But if she spends her prime years in a system that doesn't maximize her gifts, stuck in an organizational situation that doesn't know what it wants to be, playing 15 minutes in games her team wins more convincingly without her, that's a waste. That's a tragedy. That's one of the sport's most precious assets being mismanaged at the exact moment when her impact could be most profound. The WNBA needs Caitlin Clark to succeed in an environment that lets her be fully herself. That might be Indiana if they make the hard choices and commit fully, or it might be somewhere else with a different system and a different organizational philosophy. But it cannot be this undefined middle ground where she's simultaneously too important to bench and not important enough to build around. Here's what makes this situation genuinely heartbreaking rather than simply analytically interesting. Nobody is the villain. Caitlin Clark is not the problem. She's working hard, competing professionally, and doing everything asked of her. Stephanie White is not sabotaging her star player. She's coaching her system effectively and getting results. The Fever's other players are not conspiring against their teammate. They're playing their best basketball and winning games. The organization hasn't made obviously evil decisions. Everyone is doing their job, and yet the collective result is a franchise caught between two identities, unable to fully commit to either, drifting toward a future where both Caitlin's championship aspirations and the team's championship aspirations remain permanently unfulfilled. The greatest challenge Indiana faces isn't their next opponent. It isn't their defensive scheme
Don't
or
forget to
offensive
subscribe
system
and
or
turn on the
rotation
notification
decisions.
bell so you
It's the
never miss
courage
a
to
video.
have an honest conversation about who they actually are, who they actually want to be, and whether those two things can genuinely coexist. Because right now, the most honest thing that can be said about the Indiana Fever is this: they are an incredible team without Caitlin Clark and a confused team with her. And until that changes, no championship is coming for anyone.